Imagine standing in line at a cafe, and suddenly, a baby locks eyes with you for way too long. You start wondering, do I look funny? Do I have coffee foam smeared on my face? But recent research up to 2025 clarifies much of this puzzle, and the answer isn't about your appearance. Babies stare because their brains show an early bias toward faces, patterns that grab their attention more strongly than almost anything else. We'll look at the brain systems that make faces magnetic, how that early learning becomes adult gut instincts, and what to actually do when a baby stares at you. And to understand why, it helps to start with the simple question of why faces capture their attention far more than toys or bright objects. Why faces are baby brain goldmines. If you hand a newborn a colorful rattle or place a toy right in front of them, they might glance at it for a moment, maybe track its motion, and then look away. Put a human face in their line of sight, though, and their attention lingers. The face doesn't need to be one they already know. It still holds power in a way most objects don't. That difference makes a simple observation astonishing. Faces have a unique status in the infant brain. For decades, scientists have noticed this bias, but newer research adds detail about how it works. Within just days of birth, babies show a tendency to look at configurations that resemble faces rather than scrambled or random patterns. And this isn't just about visual brightness or motion, it's about specific arrangements. 2 dots above a line can keep their gaze longer than abstract shapes. One reason is that the brain is already designed to pick up on face-like patterns. Subcortical pathways, including areas like the superior colliculus, pulvina, and amygdala, give newborns a rapid alert system that makes faces stand out. Meanwhile, cortical areas like the fusiform gyrus, which in adults handles face expertise, begin fine-tuning only with more weeks and months of experience. In other words, a baby comes equipped with a head start, but one that expands with practice. Researchers describe this nature plus experience process through what's called the Conspec/can-learn framework. The Conspec system is the fast, inborn detector that makes faces seize attention right away. The can-learn system develops more slowly, allowing the cortex to learn subtle details, like the difference between a mother's smile and a stranger's grin, as babies gather more input. Together, they create a dual-track process. One pathway pulls faces into focus automatically, while the other builds skill at making sense of them. One fascinating recent addition comes from evidence that sight and smell interact in ways we don't expect. A 2024 study showed that the scent of a mother, the smell on her clothes or even her skin, enhances how an infant's brain responds to her face. EEG recordings revealed stronger face-related responses when her scent was present, though this effect dimmed as children grew older. Tiny noses, it turns out, amplify the pull of familiar faces when infants are still at their youngest and most dependent. Why such a strong commitment to faces, especially in those earliest weeks? A toy might offer colors and movement, but it doesn't signal safety or nourishment. A face, on the other hand, acts as a channel for survival information. Staring gives babies the opportunity to learn emotions and intentions before they can walk, speak, or defend themselves. A raised eyebrow, a soothing smile, or a sudden grimace. All of these are lessons written right onto the human face. Each prolonged gaze helps the child start decoding what those signals mean. Take a simple example. As an infant fixates on the moving mouth of a caregiver, they watch the shapes and rhythms of speech play out. Later, this becomes a foundation for language. It's how their auditory and visual systems begin linking. At the same time, watching tension around the eyes can teach them whether a situation is playful or stressful. Even before words, these cues help guide reactions. Staring seems motionless from the outside, but inside the brain, it is an act of constant sorting and categorizing. Neuroimaging adds more clarity. Infants younger than a year show early cortical responses to face-like patterns, though the strong, adult-like specialization of the fusiform face area doesn't arrive immediately. Instead, scans reveal activation that strengthens as months pass. That gradual sharpening suggests how important early exposure is. The baby brain isn't idle when a child stares. It's fortifying the neural scaffolding that will allow them to recognize hundreds, even thousands, of unique faces later in life. What is remarkable is how flexible this system is from the very first steps. Familiarity obviously matters. Parents and caregivers become cornerstones in the infant's mental library. Yet novelty proves just as motivating. Even a stranger's unusual beard or hairstyle adds data to be stored. Each unfamiliar face becomes another entry in the growing catalogue of what humans can look like, broadening the range of recognition. And rather than wasteful, this variety prepares them for a much wider social environment than the immediate home. The role of curiosity may not be obvious at first, but baby brain measures show it is active. Studies using near-infrared spectroscopy and EEG suggest heightened responses when an infant views unexpected or unfamiliar features, nearly as strong as the patterns triggered by familiar caregivers. This means new faces are not just tolerated, they are targets for exploration. Rather than a contradiction, balancing the comfort of the known and the intrigue of the new seems central to how infants construct social skills. To think of this as passive staring misses the point. What the infant brain is doing is closer to active analysis. Circuits become stronger each time recognition occurs. Networks linking emotion with perception start stabilizing. The brain, essentially, is training itself. And this training works quickly. Within just months, infants improve in their ability to tell apart subtle differences and begin to grasp the spectrum of human expression. That rapid improvement also shows why faces aren't interchangeable with objects. Objects help with learning to grasp, coordinate, and explore the physical environment. But faces provide social knowledge. From those, children learn trust, empathy, and communication. Without the foundation that comes from consistent face exposure, later skills like language and group interaction would stand on weaker ground. The key, then, is that staring reflects a deeper investment. A baby might look at you longer than at the most exciting toy in the room, not out of boredom, but because your face carries what their brain needs most. Every glance refines how they read emotions, judge intentions, and track social bonds. It's training that pays off in decisions and connections long after infancy is gone. That leads to one final layer of curiosity. If faces matter so much, why do babies sometimes seem to fixate more on someone unfamiliar than on their own parent? At first glance, that seems backward, yet it's a clue that staring isn't just about safety or comfort. It's about building a complete mental catalogue. To understand why that matters, we need to look at how babies handle the puzzle of the stranger's face. Stranger danger or curiosity. Why does a baby sometimes become more fascinated by a stranger than by the parent they see every day? To adults, this can feel puzzling. We expect a child to direct their attention toward the familiar, the people who feed them, soothe them, and stay near them most of the time. But again and again, in parks, cafes, or family gatherings, babies unexpectedly fix their gaze on the newcomer. What looks like contradiction becomes clearer when we consider how curiosity and safety work together during early development. When infants stare at strangers, it is not random. Parents might assume the baby is confused or even unsettled, but research suggests something more systematic. Familiar faces provide comfort, but don't expand the infant's mental library as quickly. Staring at a unique face, one with different features, expressions, or hair, adds fresh material. Each novel profile is an opportunity to refine recognition skills and to help the brain categorize human in its many forms. The stranger becomes raw data, unwittingly contributing to the infant's growing understanding of social diversity. From an evolutionary viewpoint, this creates a trade-off. Most animals show instinctive caution around unfamiliar beings, minimizing risk. But human infants begin with openness because everything starts unknown. Without exposure, it is impossible to separate safe from unsafe. Infants first need to build a large archive of faces before they can start filtering which ones signal protection versus potential threat. Seen this way, willingness to stare at strangers isn't reckless. It is preparation for sorting the world later. By the end of the first year, as this archive grows, behaviors shift, and children begin showing shyness or hesitation around strangers. This age-related change has been documented across many studies of perceptual development. Newborns often show a strong preference for face-like patterns in general. As they advance through the first months, preferences shift between familiarity and novelty, depending on context. Around 6 to 9 months, a process psychologists call perceptual narrowing causes sensitivity to become more specialized. Infants sharpen recognition for familiar categories, like their caregivers or cultural groups' faces, while losing some of the broad ability to distinguish less familiar ones. So, when a younger infant stares intently at a stranger, it is not a rejection of their parent. It reveals the phase of development they are in, where novelty offers the greatest informational payoff. Another twist is that looking longer does not always mean the same thing. Meta-analyses in developmental psychology point out that fixating on novelty and fixating on something unexpected are separate processes. One reflects open curiosity, the other reflects surprise at a mismatch between expectation and reality. So, a baby staring at an unfamiliar shopper or passerby might not be alert to danger. It might simply be curiosity loading new features into memory. Distinguishing these mechanisms helps explain why staring does not indicate alarm in most cases. The neural systems involved match this picture. When an infant's eyes settle on an unfamiliar face, brain activity shows bursts in regions tied to attention and recognition. These bursts reinforce learning, strengthening neural connections. Over time, this repeated cycle creates faster and more accurate processing of social signals. Without novelty, the system would lack the variety needed to fine-tune. Encountering strangers, then, is like exposing the brain to multiple practice rounds, each sharpening recognition further. Consider an outing to a crowded marketplace. From an adult view, an infant might look like they're staring without purpose, shifting focus from person to person at random. But close observation reveals otherwise. The baby compares facial features, perhaps a beard, eyeglasses, or hair color they have not seen before. Each new detail enriches the contrast against the caregiver's familiar face. This variety is critical for building a recognition system that can function rapidly in the complex social groups that define human life. The pattern of curiosity evolves steadily over the first year. Young infants divide their time between both familiar and unfamiliar faces. By mid-infancy, studies show they sometimes prolong their gaze more on novelty, because novelty provides more learning value. By the time perceptual narrowing accelerates toward the end of the first year, hesitation towards strangers begins to appear. This change is visible in behavior. Instead of holding eye contact freely, infants may now cling to a caregiver when someone unfamiliar approaches. The shift does not erase earlier learning, it builds on it. Early openness provides the raw data set, and later caution decides when to trust. This balancing act between curiosity and caution may help explain why humans develop social adaptability more flexibly than other primates. Infant monkeys, for instance, often avoid unfamiliar group members, which restricts what they learn. Human infants lean toward exploration first, postponing caution until it becomes useful. This strategy widens their social toolkit, giving them the ability to handle diverse groups and unfamiliar individuals throughout life. Exposure, however, is not guaranteed. Limited face-to-face interaction in the early months can alter developmental paths. Studies conducted after pandemic lockdowns found that infants with reduced exposure to varied faces sometimes showed measurable differences in how they processed unfamiliar individuals. In other words, the breadth of the library each child builds is affected by the range of people they see. Early environments leave fingerprints on facial recognition systems that can persist. The benefits of interacting with strangers extend beyond recognition. They include supporting general perceptual systems. For instance, infants younger than about 6 months often show surprising ability to tell apart individual non-human primate faces, a sensitivity that fades as focus narrows to human faces. This decline is another form of perceptual narrowing. Staring at a wide range of human faces early in life may help sustain broad perceptual skills before the brain prioritizes only the most relevant categories. Understanding staring at strangers in this way reframes it as safe learning. In early life, the risk is minimal because infants lack motor skills to act on what they see. A baby might fix their gaze on an unknown person across the room, but they are not walking toward them or engaging directly. Parents remain the gatekeepers, ensuring safety as curiosity plays out at a distance. Later, as mobility and independence grow, cautionary lessons about stranger safety become critical. But in those early months, the system functions mainly as information gathering, not risk-taking. For adults, realizing this changes how we feel when trapped under an infant's gaze. It is usually not about something unusual in appearance or behavior. To the infant, the encounter represents new and valuable material. The stranger offers variation, and variation enriches the system that will one day allow quick judgments about trust, group membership, or social intent. Meanwhile, turning more quickly away from apparent signals, not reduced attachment, but completed learning. The features are already logged and categorized. By reframing the long stare, we can better appreciate what it signifies, what most adults see as A moment of social awkwardness is actually a working session for the developing brain. It is the interplay between curiosity, preparation, and survival scaffolding. Every stranger contributes one more piece to the expanding puzzle of human appearance. By 2025, psychologists describe this pattern through adaptive models that emphasize flexibility. Early openness equips infants with variety, and later caution filters that variety into usable knowledge. Limited early encounters can alter the trajectory, but the system itself is robust, drawing strength wherever faces are available. This makes stranger stares less about who the baby happens to be looking at, and more about what every face represents in their development. You are not being judged. You are providing learning material for a system designed to last a lifetime. Exposure to novelty builds the scaffold, and cautious trust later softens the edges. What follows from this observation raises another question. If babies devote such focus to strangers, what exactly are they training themselves to detect when they stare at faces at all? The next step in understanding is not about novelty versus familiarity, but about the basic survival information that faces provide every time an infant locks eyes with another human being. Faces are survival manuals. A baby cannot tell you what they notice, cannot crawl toward what catches their eye, and cannot ask questions. Yet much of their waking life is devoted to one act: staring at faces. At first, this might seem inefficient. Shouldn't that limited energy go toward muscle growth, basic coordination, or even simply sleeping more? But staring isn't wasted energy. It's a direct way to access what functions almost like a survival guide. By watching faces, infants gain instructions about safety, danger, and connection without needing words or movement. A face functions as a living screen where human emotion is broadcast. Well before children understand language, they track eyebrows lifting, lips tightening, or cheeks spreading into a smile. Every one of those subtle shifts carries meaning about the environment. A relaxed smile signals safety. A tense jaw paired with narrowed eyes signals conflict. Even before they know the vocabulary, infants come to recognize that certain expressions indicate comfort while others forecast caution. Staring becomes an act of decoding, a form of silent translation. Those translations have immediate consequences. A newborn cannot defend itself, but it can notice alarm in a caregiver's eyes and react. That reaction translates to crying, reaching out, or shifting attention toward the adult who provides safety. Consider the chain reaction during an unexpected bang. Without knowing what the sound means, a baby reads the adult's startled expression and mirrors urgency. That learned alertness protects them long before they can escape or act independently. Faces, then, are early warning systems written into daily life. Much of this early reading ability clusters around three powerful signals: happiness, fear, and anger. Happiness is not merely uplifting. It tells the infant the environment is predictable, resources are available, and gentle exploration is welcome. Fear cues alertness, teaching the infant to be cautious when something might be wrong. Anger conveys the possibility of conflict. Over many repetitions, infants connect these expressions with real outcomes. They may not think in words, but their stored experiences shape feelings and reactions that will later appear as intuitions. These early mappings don't vanish. They evolve into the fast, nonverbal judgments adults rely on, like deciding whether to trust someone after hearing only a few words. Developmental psychologists describe these rapid responses as the product of repeated practice. Infancy supplies the rehearsal. Thousands of silent trials of watching faces shift expression by expression. Yet it is important not to describe this as a straight line from baby stares to adult gut feelings. Research shows early face learning provides a foundation, but adult interpretations also depend on later experiences, culture, and context. Our social judgments are sculpted by both those early building blocks and the decades of experience piled on top of them. Individual differences remind us this isn't just an environment-only story. Twin studies and other developmental reviews find that the ability to recognize and remember faces has a heritable component. In other words, genetic factors partly set the range of what is possible. At the same time, exposure and lived experience are critical in fine-tuning. This joint influence means infant stares build a framework while genes and environment together calibrate how sensitive that framework will become. Every child builds this framework differently. A household rich in laughter teaches one kind of baseline for expressions, while a household with frequent tension teaches another. Infants shape their social operating system based on the faces they see most often. That is why different cultures, families, and even siblings can develop different instincts about reading emotion. The early system has built-in universals. Everyone notices fear or anger, but also environment-specific calibrations that tailor survival to the child's social world. This investment is efficient because it doesn't require conscious reasoning. A baby does not think through cause and effect. Their nervous system links input and response automatically. Neurons fire, cortisol levels adjust, heart rate increases or calms, all in reaction to expressions. Observation is their primary tool, and so the brain leans into it heavily. By absorbing facial cues day after day, infants create shortcuts that later help guide trust, caution, or belonging, often without conscious effort. Faces also provide constancy amid a shifting world. Rooms change, toys rotate, sounds come and go, but the caregiver's expression anchors the child. In a noisy street, one glance toward a calm parent communicates reassurance. At home, one flash of alarm communicates danger more clearly than any spoken word. The infant doesn't need to grasp every detail of the outside world because their best compass is human expression. That compass keeps survival aligned with social signals. Survival, however, goes beyond reacting to threat. Attachment also forms through repeated emotional exchanges. A baby who cries and sees a caregiver's sympathetic face learns a crucial lesson. Comfort is reachable. These loops of expression and soothing foster security, laying the groundwork for later psychological health. Without them, children risk missing the balance of trust and comfort that healthy relationships require. This shows that survival is not only physical, it is deeply emotional, shaping how humans connect to one another. As months pass, the manual grows more sophisticated. Large signals like joy, fear, or anger set the foundation, but babies begin taking in finer cues. A smile that feels incomplete, a laugh that rings false, or eyes that hold tension even when a mouth smiles. Each is added to the system. Staring in infancy makes this progression possible. By repeatedly mapping expressions to outcomes, infants graduate from simple recognition to nuanced social awareness. Science supports this priority processing. Neuroimaging confirms that faces receive disproportionate brain resources compared to inanimate objects. This ensures those crucial channels of safety and emotional meaning are processed above all else. Each repeated look becomes another layer of neural reinforcement. The constant rehearsal through thousands of daily encounters builds durable pathways so that reading faces becomes effortless later. As adults, the payoff shows up when you enter a room and instantly sense tension or warmth. In fractions of a second, you evaluate raised voices, tightened brows, or softened smiles. These judgments feel automatic because they are built on strong associations created in infancy. But again, to avoid overstating, adult snap impressions are not only the product of early staring. They are shaped by years of experience interacting with people, by culture, and by learned strategies. Early staring gives the scaffolding, but life continues to write the instructions. This compound structure, genes shaping capacity, infants writing a first draft, and experience rewriting it endlessly, creates what we might call a human social operating system. That system serves not only individual survival, but also collective living. Communities depend on accurate signal reading for cooperation. Infants, by locking eyes with caregivers and strangers alike, begin programming the routines they will need to participate in families, friendships, and societies. When we think of survival, we often picture physical acts like securing food or escaping danger. Yet one of the most powerful survival strategies is the ability to interpret another person's eyes, mouth, or tone of face in an instant. Those skills begin in immobile infancy, when staring serves as rehearsal for navigating life among humans. Later in adulthood, those same skills allow us to avoid danger, sense trustworthiness, or reach comfort in times of uncertainty. Recognizing this thread gives new meaning to everyday moments. A baby, unable to speak, still manages to gather the signals needed to grow into an adult capable of choosing allies wisely, responding to threat quickly, and forming ties that secure belonging. That is the enduring function of hours spent gazing upward. What looks like stillness is active learning. What looks like blank staring is the writing of an inner manual that never fully closes. And once these foundations are in place, another question arises. If faces teach infants how to read the world, what happens when those tiny observers start reflecting expressions back? Neurons that mirror your smile. Ever noticed how a baby will sometimes mimic your smile or stick out their tongue right back at you? To adults, it feels uncanny, almost like looking into a tiny mirror. For decades, researchers debated why this happens. Early theories suggested it was purely instinctive, hardwired from birth. Others thought it must be learned, developing only after repeated exposure to caregivers' expressions. The debate stalled because results didn't always line up. Some studies showed newborns reliably copying tongue protrusions or smiles, while others found no consistent patterns at all. But newer work, including behavioral studies and infant brain imaging up through 2025, suggests the story sits somewhere in between. Babies may not come with perfect reflexive imitation, but they do show mirror-like responses that prepare them for social connection, even if the precise neural pathways are still under investigation. When a parent grins and a baby responds with their own uneven smile, it seems playful. But beneath that small gesture is a process linking observation with action. Infants sometimes imitate surprisingly quickly, and that timing matters. Instead of waiting to figure it out, their systems move straight into rehearsal. Even when their attempts look clumsy, those efforts indicate an early readiness to map another person's movement onto their own body. In scientific terms, some researchers describe this as mirror-like neural activity, where regions of the brain involved in motor action respond similarly whether the infant is acting or just watching. The evidence is far from conclusive, but the behavioral outcome is clear. Babies who copy expressions strengthen the interactions that hold them close to their caregivers. That's why imitation is more than play. A newborn's smile reflected back is, in effect, a social invitation. The infant signals recognition, while the caregiver, seeing themselves echoed, often feels reinforced and more eager to engage. This creates loops of interaction where emotional cues and responses lock together, long before speech. Developmental psychology highlights this as an early building block of attachment. Even very brief moments of mimicry promote bonding, trust, and responsiveness. Even if the detailed neural picture is still being refined, the practical impact is obvious. Babies' spontaneous copying makes adults feel connected and keeps care flowing. The scientific debate about imitation has had its complexities. Early landmark studies suggested that newborns could copy gestures like tongue protrusions within hours of birth, but follow-up research often failed to replicate those findings. Now, reviews highlight that imitation in infants is inconsistent, sometimes appearing strongly, sometimes not at all. Instead of undermining the phenomenon, this unevenness points to a developmental system still settling. By the second or third month, clearer patterns emerge, with smiling and basic facial gestures showing more reliable copying. So rather than being all or nothing at birth, mimicry may grow in strength as infants integrate visual input with their own motor output. Advances in infant brain imaging add another layer. While it's difficult to examine neurons directly, safe methods like EEG and FNIRS show activation in motor-related brain regions when babies watch faces and gestures. These aren't definitive mirror neurons, like those identified in primates, but they suggest infants have neural pathways that respond in a mirror-like way, laying groundwork for later imitation and empathy. This aligns with the broader conclusion that infants are not passive receivers. They actively align their own internal systems with what they see, building a mental bridge between self and other. That mental bridge explains why mimicry matters so much for development. When a baby sees a smile and attempts their own, they don't just practice the motion. Over time, they link the pattern of the movement with the pleasant states that usually accompany it: relaxation, warmth, security. Watching a frown cues a different set of internal adjustments, even if the baby can't reproduce it exactly. By rehearsing not just the outward appearance, but the feeling attached, infants are preparing for the central social skill humans depend on: empathy. The seeds of reading another's emotion are planted not in words, but in these silent mimicking exchanges. This is critical because empathy underpins nearly all human interactions. Long before children can describe emotions, their bodies are already reacting in parallel with others. An infant tensing in sync with an adult's startled look or softening in response to a caregiver's gentle smile shows how mimicry establishes emotional alignment. The ability to catch another's state is an efficient way to stay safe and connected. Later in life, it becomes the intuition we use to walk into a room and sense whether people are happy, upset, or anxious. Without explanation, early mimicry is one of empathy's first exercises. Parents notice these interactions instinctively. A mother sticks out her tongue, and after a pause, the infant slowly extends theirs in return. A father makes a surprised face, and the child's eyes widen in apparent echo. These are charming moments, but they are also milestones, visible signs that neural and social systems are aligning. Each imperfect imitation is practice, refining the mechanics of copying gestures and the emotional resonance that comes with them. From the caregiver's side, each exchange sends a reward signal, encouraging more playful interaction and deepening the emotional bond. Not every expression is equally mirrored. Smiles and tongue protrusions show up most consistently in studies, while more subtle or complex gestures vary. The bias makes sense. Expressions with high social value, like smiles, are prioritized. Even if newborn responses are hit or miss, by the time infants are a few months old, positive expressions are more likely to be echoed. This helps focus bonding on cues that matter most for continued interaction. Understanding mimicry's role goes beyond attachment. It speaks to how humans learn. Copying expressions is a precursor to copying actions. If a baby can coordinate sucking in their cheeks after watching a parent, later they can try raising a spoon the same way, or eventually imitating speech sounds. The mirror-like responses that anchor early imitation are not limited to faces. They represent a general learning strategy. Watching, practicing, and refining is how culture itself is passed on. These rhythms of observation and repetition show how an infant's social toolkit expands day by day. Researchers also note that mimicry highlights the balance of biology and environment. There is evidence that genetics shape how easily infants fall into imitation cycles, but practice and exposure strongly guide refinement. Babies surrounded by frequent engagement tend to show more imitation behaviors, while those with fewer interactions may demonstrate them less often. This suggests imitation is both a capacity and a skill. It comes with a foundation, but experience strengthens and shapes it. The picture is also nuanced by developmental differences. For some children, particularly in studies of autism spectrum conditions, imitation behaviors appear atypical or delayed. Mirror-like activity may still occur, but the link to overt copying is less consistent. Understanding these variations helps clarify how imitation supports social learning, while also emphasizing why early support matters. Recognizing different responsiveness in copying gives caregivers and clinicians a way to identify when developmental pathways may need extra attention. Still, amidst the complexities, the daily meaning of imitation is straightforward. Families know its power without needing scientific detail. When a baby repeats a sibling's silly face, laughter fills the room. When grandparents see a grin mirrored back, they feel instantly connected. These exchanges provide joy, but they also perform quiet work in wiring the child into the emotional and social world. Copying is not trivial. It is practice for belonging. Each familiar moment, catching a yawn spread from an adult to an infant, or watching tiny lips purse after seeing a kiss, testifies to how closely observation and action intertwine. The imitation may fade in and out, but the structure it builds becomes permanent. Over time, these rehearsals accumulate into instincts that make communication fluid and nonverbal cues reliable. So when you see a baby echo your tongue-out gesture, it's not just entertainment. It's a window into the processes that set up cooperation, empathy, and shared understanding later in life. Babies are not waiting passively until they can talk. They are already rehearsing how to be social beings through every small reflection of your face. And while imitation gives us insight into how infants start building trust and empathy, it also raises another puzzle about faces. Sometimes babies can track and recognize faces we might not expect adults to notice at all. From monkey faces to human selectivity. Why are 6-month-old babies sometimes better at telling monkey faces apart than grown adults? On the surface, it seems unlikely. Adults rely on face recognition every day, from spotting family in a crowd to remembering co-workers and friends. Yet in controlled experiments, infants at 6 months can notice distinctions between monkey faces that to an adult look nearly identical. Their brains, still open to a wide range of possibilities, sort details with a sharpness that fades in only a few short months. By 9 months, that ability declines, and human faces dominate attention. Psychologists explain this rapid shift with the concept of perceptual narrowing. In early infancy, the brain operates like a wide-field camera, processing many categories equally: human faces, animal faces, and even cartoon-like patterns. Exposure feeds the system, and almost every face is treated as relevant. But the brain cannot maintain that openness forever. By around 9 months, attention narrows, sharpening expertise for human faces and letting sensitivity to non-human faces drift. This is part of a predictable timeline. By about 6 months, infants can discriminate a wide range of faces, including monkeys, but by 9 months their selectivity pivots toward humans unless they continue to be exposed to other face types, perceptual narrowing, Pascalis and colleagues. The window is not random. Evolution seems to have built it as a design choice. Start broad to allow flexibility, then specialize efficiently for the environment that matters most. For adults, this explains why monkey faces blur together. Our brains once detected those differences, but over time they filtered them out. This trimming is not failure, but optimization. Just as training in music sharpens perception of notes and rhythms, daily exposure to human expressions sharpens face processing in the child. Abilities that are not reinforced, whether animal faces or foreign speech sounds, are deprioritized. The system trades breadth for depth, leaving behind talent that infants once displayed with ease. This process mirrors changes in language development. Infants younger than a year can hear distinctions in speech sounds across languages, even ones they will never speak. By their first birthday, sensitivity focuses almost exclusively on the sounds of the language they hear daily. Again, it looks like a loss, but it is in fact a specialization shaped to the child's environment. Perception becomes tuned to whatever supports survival and communication. The same principle holds for faces. General sensitivity at first, narrowing down as experience defines which categories will have lasting relevance. Concrete examples make the shift clear. Picture a 6-month-old presented with 3 different monkey photographs. The infant notices subtle patterns, lighter patches of hair on one, a darker brow ridge on another, perhaps different markings around the cheeks. To adults, all 3 appear nearly the same. By 9 months, even the infant begins treating them as similar, while simultaneously becoming far more precise at separating human faces from one another. What seems a loss is an exchange, fleeting ability to pass animals traded for a lifelong refinement in recognizing human individuals. The timing of this narrowing, however, is not fixed. Experiments show that training can delay or soften the decline. In one study, babies exposed to repeated pictures and interactions with monkey faces beyond 6 months retain their discriminative ability for longer than those without such exposure. The implication is that continued experience shapes what the brain keeps active. Just as children with bilingual households maintain sensitivity to multiple languages, children exposed to greater face diversity can sustain broader perceptual ranges. This is crucial. Experience is not only a contributor, but a deciding factor in how long openness lasts. Thinking about the implications, perceptual narrowing reinforces that learning requires pruning. A brain that keeps every skill equally sharp would waste energy and create confusion. Clear specializations ensure processing remains efficient. That efficiency explains why adults can navigate dense social groups, quickly noting familiar and unfamiliar people, and reacting to their expressions in near real time. Without narrowing, the system would remain unfocused. By becoming a specialist in human faces, infants build the structure needed for survival in a social species. Yet the pruning process is never absolute. Adults can relearn categories with significant effort. With training, they may regain the ability to distinguish monkey faces, much like they can reacquire sensitivity to unfamiliar phonetic contrasts. The natural fluency infants display is gone, but pathways remain dormant, waiting to be activated again. This supports the view that perceptual narrowing stores competencies, rather than deleting them outright. What disappears is effortless access, not the fundamental capacity. Beyond experiments, narrowing also highlights the social logic of human development. A baby's survival depends heavily on attachments to caregivers, on reading when conditions are safe, when danger threatens, when comfort is available. A monkey face offers no assistance in meeting these needs. A parent's smile or anxious frown does. Specializing in human faces is a way to maximize the signals most predictive of care and survival. The loss of animal face recognition reflects the trade-off, focusing energy where it counts most. The general timeline varies slightly across individuals and environments. Households with frequent pets or animal interactions may affect how quickly sensitivity narrows, just as diverse cultural or linguistic experiences alter. Language tuning. The system is guided by both biology and lived experience, balancing universality with flexibility. This adaptability helps children thrive across vastly different societies, urban or rural, multilingual or monolingual, pet-filled households or not. Narrowing is therefore not rigid, but responsive. At the same time, the principle underscores how infants become cultural specialists. Just as practice with monkey faces preserves sensitivity, frequent exposure to diverse human faces, across ethnicities, ages, and expressions, enriches the developing recognition system. The categories that remain sharp are those continually reinforced. Ultimately, this reflects a brain calibrated to match its social and cultural environment, crafting skills that align with daily encounters. Perceptual narrowing also teaches us about the shape of development more broadly. Growth is not about accumulating endless skills, but about deciding which to strengthen. Efficiency is as important as capacity. The pruning that causes a child to lose animal face recognition is the same mechanism that makes them exceptionally skilled at distinguishing people who matter. Parents, siblings, peers, neighbors. Specialization makes them experts in the environment they live in. Adults often think of narrowing as a limitation, lamenting lost skills, like distinguishing speech sounds from unused languages. But it demonstrates the brain's ability to prioritize. In this sense, the 6-month-old superpower of spotting monkeys isn't wasted. It serves as an early trial run, a way to stretch perceptual capacity before it is refined into more practical expertise. Without this initial openness, specialization would not be possible. The wide beginning allows for the later precision that human social life demands. The pattern is not confined to laboratory experiments or abstract theories. Its traces are visible in everyday observation. Parents see it in how infants at first show equal fascination with pets and strangers, but then shift toward tracking family members more carefully. Over time, attention tightens further still, favoring the people and faces that anchor their daily lives. From openness to selectivity, the process marks a transition from general learning to social expertise. That shift opens new questions about how face recognition systems differ across the globe. Infants everywhere begin broadly tuned, but the range of experience that sculpts narrowing varies by household, community, and broader culture. The categories that are prioritized come not only from biology, but also from social exposure. This means that narrowing does not occur identically across all infants, but reflects the environments they are immersed in. And that brings us to a deeper consideration: when and how cultural background influences which faces infants stare at, and what they learn from doing so. Culture shapes who get stared at. Do all infants use their gaze in the same way, no matter where they are raised? At first it seems reasonable to think yes. All babies share fundamental brain structures, the same drive to identify caregivers, and the same interest in faces. Yet close observation shows something more nuanced. Emerging evidence and anthropological accounts suggest that caregiving practices and local expectations about eye contact influence how infants are guided to use their gaze. While robust research exists on cultural eye contact norms in adults, cross-cultural data focused specifically on infants remain fewer, which makes current findings suggestive rather than definitive. Still, the patterns visible so far reveal how even the early stare is not entirely uniform across the globe. In many communities, extended eye contact between infants and adults is embraced as an important form of exchange. Parents intentionally lean into their child's gaze, greeting it with smiles, cooing sounds, or playful gestures. In such contexts, a baby quickly learns that looking directly into another's eyes is met with warmth, and those moments are stretched out into games like peekaboo. The act of staring becomes central to building trust, helping infants recognize that prolonged gaze equals connection. Other societies place more limits on direct staring. Here, lingering eye contact might be interpreted as a challenge or as disrespect, even when coming from a child. Infants raised in these contexts receive gentle signals that engagement should take subtler forms. Instead of prolonged stares, babies learn to shift their attention quickly, communicate through posture or tone, or acknowledge someone by looking briefly before redirecting the eyes. In these situations, it is not that children lack curiosity, but rather that gaze is shaped into more indirect methods of social alignment. Practical caregiving routines amplify these cultural preferences. Infants carried in slings or strapped close to a caregiver's chest encounter faces from inches away for hours at a time. This constant exposure encourages them to linger visually on facial details. In contrast, infants placed more often in cradles or sleep mats may have longer stretches without immediate facial proximity. To gather cues, they turn more to voices, gestures, or shifts in body movement. Such differences in daily practice alter how often and how intensely babies are able to practice eye contact. These experiences, repeated thousands of times, accumulate into habits that persist. Children who experience delighted feedback when they hold someone's gaze learn that direct eye contact is rewarding. As they grow, this becomes part of their social toolkit, making prolonged eye contact feel natural. Children who are gently redirected learn the opposite lesson, that too much staring disrupts harmony, and thus become more comfortable attending to subtler signals like rhythm of speech or changes in intonation. Both outcomes are functional. Neither erases the biological tendency to notice faces, but each sets a different default for how the tendency will be expressed. What stands out is how closely infant gaze habits resemble adult conventions in their communities. Where adults treat prolonged eye contact as a marker of honesty or confidence, babies are encouraged to stare persistently. Where adults view such eye contact as a potential sign of disrespect, especially toward authority figures, babies are subtly guided to avert their gaze. Each gentle correction or delighted return stare amounts to training, embedding lessons about timing and appropriateness long before children can speak. Psychologists observing infant gaze across cultures emphasize that biology ensures faces always attract attention, but culture calibrates how the attention unfolds. The same newborn reflex may result in very different outcomes depending on the surrounding norms. A baby in one family learns to sustain eye contact until a laugh arrives. Another learns to break gaze sooner to show deference. Over countless daily interactions, this calibration shapes what looking comes to mean for the child's developing sense of social interaction. Consider how parents structure household routines. Some intentionally build face-to-face exchanges into moments like feeding, diapering, or lulling to sleep, narrating their actions with expressions and voice inflections to keep attention locked. In other families, these routines carry less verbal and facial performance. Babies there observe the wider environment, catching tone and rhythm more than steady gaze. Both styles transmit signals, but they highlight how much cultural variation can steer the trajectory of infant staring. Public spaces add another layer. In contexts where baby stares are greeted warmly, strangers accept them as ordinary, even endearing. A child in a market might lock eyes with a passerby, and the moment passes unremarked. In other contexts, however, parents may gently redirect the gaze to avoid signaling rudeness. These small acts accumulate, teaching infants not only how to gaze at familiar caregivers, but also how to manage attention in the presence of outsiders. The developmental implications are long-term. Cultures that normalize eye contact often produce adults who interpret gaze as a baseline sign of engagement and sincerity. Cultures that discourage extended staring may produce adults who prioritize listening and posture as signs of respect. For one person, locking eyes signals openness. For another, lowering the gaze signals reverence. The diversity of adult interaction styles traces back, at least in part, to how infants were once taught to manage the natural impulse to stare. Global research comparing infant visual attention adds detail, though available studies remain relatively limited. Data consistently show that babies everywhere are initially drawn to faces, but the length and style of their visual engagement reflects the local caregiving environment. Where joint attention, shared gaze during play and teaching, is emphasized, infants clock longer looks at caregivers' faces. Where such practices are restrained, infants invest more energy in processing vocal or physical cues. Both approaches work, adjusting the same biological reflex into culturally appropriate habits. Importantly, none of these variations imply superiority. They show flexibility. Both high gaze and low gaze systems foster bonding and provide infants the information they need for community life. One emphasizes minute visual changes in the eyes and mouth. The other tunes attention to more subtle signals in tone or body stance. Each method supports children in becoming competent adults within their surrounding social worlds. The infant's stare is thus not fixed but guided, shaped into whichever form best aligns with the family and cultural environment. In today's global settings, these influences often overlap. A child with parents from different cultural backgrounds may receive conflicting lessons, encouraged to sustain gaze at home in some circumstances, but to look away in others. Infants adjust, merging cues into hybrid strategies that allow them to navigate both environments. Later, these same children may show unusual skill in switching styles, comfortable with extended eye contact in one situation, equally comfortable avoiding it in another. Mixed cultural upbringing highlights just how adaptable the early staring reflex can be. Stepping back, 2 points are especially clear. First, the biological attraction to faces is universal. That starting reflex brings every infant into social interaction. Second, cultural practices guide how that reflex is expressed over time, reinforcing or redirecting it until it becomes a durable habit. Which outcome produces better social skills later? Evidence so far suggests both routes can lead to strong results, but the skill sets differ. One strengthens fast visual decoding of facial expressions, the other hones sensitivity to tone and rhythm. Both are adaptive, tuned to the demands of the community. Recognizing these dual influences changes how we interpret a baby's gaze in everyday life. A stare might not carry the same message everywhere. Its meaning is filtered through layers of expectation and reinforcement. For adults observing an infant in a grocery store or a public square, the intensity or hesitation in the baby's look may quietly reflect the culture that child is learning to embody. Understanding that variation reminds us that even the simplest act of staring is more than reflex. It is practice for participation in a shared social world. As we consider this, another question begins to emerge. If infants' gazes carry biological roots, but also cultural layers, why do so many human traditions, well beyond early development, treat steady eye contact as a pathway to something deeper? The spiritual twist of gazing. Many practices in human life, from meditation circles to therapy groups, draw on the act of sitting face to face and holding eye contact. This is the realm of what we might call the spiritual twist of gazing. Moments where prolonged eye contact is used deliberately to deepen connection beyond conversation. Such encounters are described as disarming or even transcendent, turning a simple look into a shared moment of presence. What is striking is that infants, without guidance, already engage in something similar. Long before they can walk or speak, they meet the eyes of those around them and sustain that unbroken stare. Adults on the receiving end often remark that the experience feels oddly profound, as if filtered through a lens larger than ordinary communication. At a biological level, the mechanics of baby staring are straightforward. Infants fixate on eyes and faces because those are survival-relevant cues. Their developing brains emphasize patterns that signal nourishment, safety, and social contact. Neuroscientific research confirms that regions involved in attention and perception become active during such gaze. Yet what the adult perceives in the moment often far exceeds this. Caregivers commonly describe feeling as though the child's gaze cuts straight through them, or as if time slows while the baby stares. The contrast between what is happening in the infant brain, simple learning and bonding tasks, and how the adult interprets it opens the space where biological explanation intersects with subjective depth. When adults participate in structured eye-gazing practices, they describe effects that sound similar. Without words, a sense of recognition or intimacy can arise, as if attention itself carries weight. This parallel suggests why many spiritual rituals have preserved the act of mutual staring. It creates a channel that reaches beneath language into what people often describe as core being. Babies, though unaware, evoke the same experience through instinct rather than practice. They do not intend to unravel social barriers, but their natural fixation recalls the intensity that adults later ritualize in spiritual exercises. From an evolutionary standpoint, prolonged mutual gaze reinforced social cohesion. For an infant, staring at the caregiver ensures that attention is reciprocated, strengthening trust and belonging. For the adult, responding to that gaze helps secure a bond, which ultimately stabilizes the group. Over generations, structured practices may simply have built upon this simple but powerful loop. What began in infancy as a survival-driven signal of attachment eventually became repurposed into adult rituals of connection, where the value lies not only in protection, but also in meaning. For the person held in a baby's stare, the effect often bypasses ordinary explanation. Unlike a brief glance that feels transactional, a sustained gaze conveys gravity. In such moments, non-speaking infants can seem to deliver recognition in its purest form. Adults often experience this as disorienting, even startling, because it is stripped of language, distraction, and narrative. Whether the adult interprets this as spiritual, emotional, or simply profound, the root sensation is the same, being fully noticed in silence. To understand this further, developmental researchers connect these experiences to what is called the baby schema. This refers to infant features such as large eyes, round cheeks, and small chins, traits that consistently trigger caregiving responses in adults. Brain imaging studies reveal that seeing these features, and especially holding eye contact with them, activates reward-related circuitry. The same regions involved in motivation and positive emotion light up, explaining why adults report such intense, even transcendent feelings during a child's gaze. Here we see both sides of the phenomenon, the measurable neural response and the subjective perception of depth. In this way, the supposed mystical element of infant staring finds grounding in observable science. Adults are primed to enjoy and respond to it because their brains code it as rewarding. Yet this does not diminish the lived impact. Even if explained in terms of reward pathways, the adult's emotional report remains valid. What they interpret as profound attention may not signal insight from the child, but it does reflect authentic interaction between two nervous systems. Whether one prefers calling it sacred or social, the effect matters, and it is something we can study in measurable ways. Because direct recognition is one of the most basic social needs, the infant's gaze strikes a powerful chord. Long before they acquire language, children communicate presence by fixing their eyes on others. This creates the nonverbal equivalent of saying, "I see you." Eye-gazing rituals in many traditions echo the same purpose, offering moments where words no longer serve and simple presence delivers. Connection. The difference is that infants are not seeking transcendence. They are using the only accumulated tool they have for bonding. Still, the overlap shows why adults often interpret the shared moment in spiritual terms. It mirrors what our cultures carve into ritual. The perception of interconnectedness plays a role here as well. Infants are entirely dependent, and their gaze is a demonstration of that need. Caregivers, on seeing and feeling that stare, are neurologically cued to respond, reinforcing connection. Adults may frame the moment as spiritually tinged, but at its root it signals the truth of human interdependence. No one survives without others' recognition and care. The intensity we sometimes call sacred may stem from sensing, even briefly, that reliance. It is also instructive to note what infants are not doing. They are not intentionally meditating, nor invoking spiritual insight. They are monitoring faces for emotion, attention, and safety. The adult's interpretation creates the added layer of meaning. This distinction matters. The mystery lies not in magical properties of the infant, but in how human perception converts simple cues into complex experiences. Yet that same process underscores how rituals emerge. What starts as unremarkable biology can become the foundation for practices that cultures treat as pathways to insight. Consider your own experience of being stared at by a baby. Often the response is to laugh, to smile back, or to make a small sound to soften the intensity. Less often, people simply hold still and meet the gaze. In those rare moments, the encounter may feel transformative, an unexpected calm, a fleeting sense of connection, or the realization that basic recognition has extraordinary impact. This is what rituals of eye contact seek to manufacture intentionally. Babies deliver it by default. The overlap teaches us something enduring. Human beings construct elaborate structures, religions, therapies, communities, all to answer the craving of being seen. Children show us that the foundation is already present from the start. Through eyes alone, they recreate the very experiences we later interpret in spiritual language. That does not reduce the importance of ritual. Rather, it shows the universality of gaze as a human pathway to recognition. So when adults speak of a baby's stare as spiritual, it helps to treat the claim with nuance. The biological explanation is solid. Infants attend to faces because their brains are tuned for it, and adults respond emotionally because reward systems are activated by childlike features. The subjective report is also legitimate. Many do experience the gaze as transcendent or sacred. Together, these perspectives show how biology and meaning intertwine. Staring may originate in survival circuits, but it resonates as something larger because it touches a universal human need. In that sense, infant staring is not evidence of mystical access to secret knowledge. Rather, it is a reminder of the baseline human truth that recognition sustains us socially and emotionally. By doing what biology compels them to do, babies recreate feelings that adults pursue through deliberate ritual. The experience appears ordinary on the surface, but it resonates deeply, leaving those who meet it searching for ways to describe its impact. And while we may frame such encounters in spiritual terms, they also highlight something pragmatic. The reactions we have when caught in a baby's gaze echo processes that continue into adulthood, influencing much more than rituals or emotions. Those same rapid responses to faces and eyes connect to how we navigate trust, belonging, and the decisions we make in daily life. What baby stares teach adults about decision-making? What does a baby stare have to do with how adults make choices about trust, leadership, or cooperation? At first glance, the two situations seem miles apart. Infants stare because their survival depends on absorbing information. Adults make decisions with the benefit of education, experience, and deliberate thought. Yet research suggests the link is not coincidental. The systems that guide early staring contribute to the rapid, intuitive social judgments that adults still rely on. This influence is not absolute. Culture, later experience, and reasoning all add layers. But the groundwork built in infancy continues shaping how impressions form. The critical feature connecting the two stages is speed. Babies never analyze an expression carefully. They respond to micropatterns in a fraction of a second. Adults pride themselves on reasoning, but studies show our brains still operate on similar timelines when reading faces. Trust judgments can form after seeing a face for less than half a second. Those instant reactions reflect the same pathways that once told infants whether to cling for safety or explore more freely. In infancy, the priority was survival. In adulthood, similar shortcuts help manage the complexity of social life. Consider what happens when infants repeatedly observe expressions of happiness, fear, or frustration. Over time, the brain reinforces those lessons until they become automatic. The same automaticity shows up decades later, when adults enter social situations and feel impressions before logic arrives. A smile across a meeting table or a tense jaw in a colleague sparks gut feelings about reliability. The cue is processed first, the reasoning follows after. The association is not deterministic, but it shows how early face learning contributes to social heuristics, the shortcuts that allow fast decision-making in uncertain conditions. Recent findings up to 2025 reveal how much adults lean on these shortcuts in settings that matter. In experiments, participants often chose partners for group tasks based on quick face exposure rather than detailed background information. Predictable patterns emerged. Calm or confident expressions drew more trust, while tense or withdrawn faces discouraged it, even when the objective data suggested otherwise. This does not mean people cannot override first impressions, but it highlights how automatic the process is, echoing the pairing of expression and outcome once rehearsed in infancy. Psychologists describe this as the architecture of heuristics. For a baby, the rule might be simple. Relaxed expression equals safety. Wide eyes may signal caution. Those lessons repeat until they become intuitive. As adults, the same principles drive everyday choices. Whether to trust a person's steady look in a negotiation, or to feel uncertain about someone whose expression seems guarded. These rules save cognitive energy, but they also introduce bias. Just as infants sometimes misinterpret an expression, adults assign meaning that may not reflect reality. Because these instincts are useful but imperfect, later reflection and structured information should temper snap judgments. Think of the process like building a program. While staring, infants log connections between a face and what follows: comfort, stress, attention, neglect. Each entry strengthens the internal code. By the time those infants become adults, the program is still running, though now it operates far below conscious awareness. This continuity explains why every culture shows reliance on first impressions and why they feel convincing even when superficial. The brain's early survival system continues translating cues into decisions long after the original training period ends. Adults notice the influence most in moments of uncertainty. Walking into a job interview, meeting someone new, or stepping into an unfamiliar group, impressions set in before questions are asked. Body posture and facial tension register immediately, pulling judgment into shape. The sensation that something is off, in a smile, or that warmth radiates from another person's eyes, is the adult version of the infant's urgent reaction to a caregiver's mood. Both rely on the same rapid pattern recognition. One condensed example illustrates the point: leadership judgments. Studies show that adults frequently rate faces with confident expressions or strong visual features as more leader-like, regardless of qualifications. These snap evaluations parallel infant learning, where safety or authority was assessed by caregiver expression. The adult brain reuses that template, associating dominance or reassurance with competence. These shortcuts streamline decision-making, but they can also mislead when appearances diverge from substance. The same pattern is visible in economic interactions. In trust games, participants often favor smiling partners despite being told that past behavior predicts reliability better than expressions. The immediate sense of safety conveyed by a positive appearance has deep roots. In infancy, smiles and warmth marked a source of care. The association persists into adulthood, guiding choices even when more reliable evidence is available. Again, this is not the only influence on decision-making, but it remains a strong and measurable one. Cultural variation adds another dimension. Because norms around staring and face-to-face engagement differ worldwide, adults in different societies carry distinct defaults. Those who grew up in environments where infants were encouraged to hold direct gaze may rely more heavily on facial impressions. Others taught to rely less on eye contact may emphasize tone of voice, group context, or background reputation more strongly. The adult decision process therefore reflects both universal biology and the cultural filters that guided how infant staring was expressed. Emotion circuitry explains why these judgments carry such force. The amygdala, critical for processing threat and safety, links strongly to face perception. Babies calibrate it to respond to caregiver fear or delight. Adults enlist the same area when sizing up strangers. This overlap gives snap judgments their emotional weight. A narrowed brow can trigger unease before any words are exchanged. Because the amygdala acts quickly, decisions often feel intuitively certain even when information is scarce. Rational processing follows, but the emotional impression is already set. The persistence of these systems across life has clear implications. A baby's long stare is not a passive delay, but an active form of coding. Over time, the system learns rules, and those rules continue operating. Adults may not consciously recall the thousands of encounters that wrote the program, but the architecture remains. Rapid assessments of trust, safety, or competence may feel instinctive because, in many ways, they are the matured version of staring sessions once practiced daily before language. Recognizing the origins of these instincts does not diminish their value. Fast impressions can be life-saving in moments where immediate action is necessary. They also support social cohesion, allowing groups to coordinate without reanalyzing each interaction. But the research also underscores the need for balance. Knowing that face-based intuition stems partly from infant programming helps explain both its power and its fallibility. By stepping back and incorporating reflection, we can catch situations where instinct alone is insufficient. The largest consequence is that early biases continue shaping decisions in major arenas. Employers making hiring choices, people selecting leaders, or citizens voting in elections may believe they are purely rational, while early face-based heuristics provide strong undercurrents. The 2025 findings reinforce that awareness is critical. Understanding the role of intuition allows for compensation, ensuring decisions do not rest solely on impressions shaped long before reason entered the picture. What begins as silent staring in a crib can therefore have effects many decades later. The effortless way faces still sway judgment illustrates how learning compounds across time. These lessons from infancy are not the whole story. Life experience, culture, and conscious reasoning all matter, but they remain one enduring strand woven into adult decision-making. And grasping this connection sets up an even more practical question. If early staring helps wire systems adults still use, what can paying closer attention to gazes and expressions teach us right now in ordinary life? Practical lessons for your daily life. Practical lessons from infant staring aren't abstract. They're habits you can bring into your daily life. Adults often skim across people's expressions, splitting attention between words, tasks, and distractions. Babies, on the other hand, invest deeply in every face they encounter. That difference highlights 4 simple practices we can adapt for stronger communication. Each is grounded in what infant research shows works for connection and survival, but scaled into choices adults can make. The first practice is to extend your eye contact slightly. Infant studies show that holding gaze for more than just a second allows babies to catch subtle shifts in expression, changes that vanish if they glance away too soon. Adults benefit in the same way. Giving someone an extra beat of sustained attention reveals signals beneath surface words, whether excitement, hesitation, or quiet stress. You don't need to fix anyone with an unblinking stare. Instead, think of it as letting your focus rest, long enough that your perception catches what would otherwise slip past. These small extensions of gaze improve emotional accuracy over time by creating the space to actually observe. The second practice is watching for fleeting micro-expressions. Babies are experts at lingering dwell times that help them pick up details without naming them. Tiny lip movements or flashes in the eyes. Developmental research shows these signals carry genuine emotional content, even when words mask them. Adults can reawaken this skill by slowing down and noticing. You may see a teammate's smile tighten for a split second when a deadline is mentioned, or catch the way a friend's eyes brighten briefly at a small detail in conversation. These glimpses don't provide certainty, but they give you a better read of unspoken feelings. Over time, responding to such details builds stronger empathy, because you're tuning in to what's real rather than what is merely said. The third practice is to be comfortable with silence. Infants can hold a gaze for long, wordless stretches. They don't fill the stillness, they absorb. Adults often feel awkward if exchanges pause, jumping in with chatter to keep things moving. Studies in child development highlight the value of stillness. Infants use pauses to consolidate information and deepen responsiveness. You can apply the same principle by allowing silence to settle for a moment before rushing forward. That might mean holding back a reply just long enough to notice how someone's expression shifts after their words, or resisting the urge to change. Subjects quickly. Those pauses can reveal whether a person's smile fades, or if their face relaxes into relief. The quiet gives you a chance to notice things you would otherwise miss, and it shows the other person they are being given space, not pressure. The fourth practice is to remain mindful of cultural styles of gaze. Anthropology and psychology both show that norms for eye contact vary widely. Infants adapt by mirroring how caregivers treat looking, encouraged in some households, gently redirected in others. Adults do well to remember this. In some contexts, direct gaze signals respect and engagement. In others, it can be read as intrusive. When you step into cross-cultural relationships, practicing sensitivity to gaze expectations prevents missteps and builds trust. Adjusting your own habits is not about abandoning authenticity, but about reading the environment, just as infants quickly learn to do with caregivers. Taken together, these shifts, longer attention, sensitivity to micro-expressions, patience with silence, and cultural awareness, give you practical leverage. They are modest tools, not magic solutions, but they increase accuracy in reading others and create avenues for stronger human connection. The aim is not to replicate infant behavior fully, but to recall the strengths of a gaze that looks carefully before rushing away. And here's where the self-awareness comes in. Notice how your own expressions feed back into these exchanges. Just as babies study caregivers, your co-workers, friends, or loved ones are constantly absorbing what your eyes and mouth reveal. Being mindful of what you project matters as much as what you see in others. The most important point is that reapplying infant-like attention means slowing down. Adults live in environments crowded with rushing and divided focus. A few extra moments of presence, extended eye contact, or silent observation can change how clearly relationships function. These aren't fixes for every miscommunication, but they tilt the odds toward more accurate understanding. The benefits are cumulative. The more you practice, the more naturally they weave into everyday interactions, and the less effort it takes over time. Interactive reflection also helps solidify these ideas. Consider when a baby has ever locked eyes with you. How did it feel? Was it playful, unsettling, or oddly grounding? Drop your story in the comments below. Your memory of that intensity is a reminder of the same power gaze carries in adulthood. Sharing those experiences with others builds recognition that this isn't abstract science. It's something most of us have felt firsthand and can learn from. If babies seem relentless in their stares, it's because they're programming systems that will anchor their survival in a social world. Adults may not need to stare quite that intently, but we can borrow their focus to strengthen how we relate. Paying attention the way they do, without rushing past faces, returns us to skills that human development depends on. These small recoveries make daily exchanges richer, allowing us to feel what is actually being conveyed, not just what is said. And those lessons anchor one final perspective. The meaning of a baby's stare isn't about something odd in your appearance at all. It's about the foundational wiring of social judgment that every one of us once rehearsed, and still rely on in our own way, even now. Babies stare at strangers not because something is unusual about them, but because those long gazes are important practice sessions among several influences that shape social learning. Each look helps lay down foundational patterns that influence later social perception. In adulthood, we still rely on similar systems when we make first impressions or sense trust in a split second. The takeaway is simple. Babies stare to build the social systems that guide our snap judgments later. So next time a baby locks eyes with you, know you're part of a lifetime of social training. Share your own story in the comments, and subscribe for more explorations that blend research with reflection. Seen this way, a baby's stare is less mystery and more invitation, a quiet place to practice being seen.